I'm Suneet Mittal. I'm a director of electrophysiology and chair of cardiology at the Valley Health System in Paramus, New Jersey. That's a great question. And obviously, for one thing, we do a lot more transseptal punctures than I did in fellowship. It's such a routine part of our procedure. I would say the evolution has really been in stages. The first stage, of course, was like many people, we started with a Brock needle to do our transseptal punctures. Over time, for a variety of reasons, we moved over to a dedicated RF-based needle for transseptal puncture. Then really the big advance for us was moving to a solution where instead of a RF needle, we basically transitioned to an RF wire to do the transseptal puncture. And really the biggest advent for us now is the incorporation of the VersaCross Connect system with an RF wire, which really allows us to do transseptal puncture, often with larger sheaths, without having to do catheter exchanges with catheters in the left atrium. The net result for us is that we believe that the procedures are faster and safer for our patients. Initially, obviously, the Brock needle is something that we all trained in. It's been what's been around for the longest period of time. But we started to realize that for many patients who had thicker septums, either because that's just what their septum was, or in individuals who'd undergone prior left atrial procedures of any kind, the septum hypertrophied. And sometimes it was difficult to penetrate with a standard needle. And increasingly, we found ourselves having to use a electrocautery probe to essentially convert that needle into an RF-based needle system to cross into the left atrium. Some initial histologic work led us to be concerned that that may not be as precise as we wanted, that we may be coring a ragged and larger hole than would be ideal. And it seemed that the RF needle would be ideally suited to mitigate these two issues: the inability to cross thick septums, but also to have a much more controlled crossing of the septum. And that was really the first switch for us, moving from a standard needle to an RF-enabled needle. There's so many transseptal tools currently available on the market. I think that you need to have a tool that, of course, delivers consistent results in your hands. And, ideally, it should be one that minimizes some of the challenges that have been present with the historical tools like, the RF and, standard needles. Flushing the system, having to rewire systems should you not hit the initial area that you want to cross with on the first pass, having to use, an electrocautery system to cross. And all of these things need to be taken into account when you choose the optimal system. It's still an area where many complications occur during procedures, and it's one that you want to make as free of complications as possible to ensure that you have great outcomes after procedures that require transseptal puncture. At this point, our transseptal only changes in terms of the sheath that we're using to cross, but otherwise it's a very standard procedure where we incorporate the VersaCross Connect dilator with an RF-enabled guide wire. And the only other aspect of the procedure that changes is where in the septum we want to cross, which will be a little bit different for a catheter ablation procedure and maybe different for a left atrial appendage closure procedure. With the latter types of procedures, our puncture site is typically guided by knowledge of pre-procedural CT imaging. So we've been able to cross with the VersaConnect system and the FARAPULSE sheath in every case without having to resort to any other solutions. I think that the VersaCollect dilator has been great in being able to use it to torque the sheath as which we would want. We would still like to see some improvements. I think the biggest is really to be able to lock the connector and the sheath together in a way that we're used to when we deal with transseptal sheaths and the inner dilator. That's still not possible with the system. But the key for us really has been is that by using this system in together with the RF wire, basically a sheathless catheter entry, exchangeless catheter entry into the left atrium has been possible in every single patient. Furthermore, since we use CT pre-procedure planning to guide, whether we want to puncture more inferior or more anterior, more mid or posterior or anterior, that's also been possible with this system, without fail. And so that's really saved us procedure time and the need, to have to do repeated transseptal punctures. I think that results in less procedural time, which inevitably improves patient outcomes. Yeah, we typically will shape the dilator, on the table before we're inserting it, very much like those who are available with the needle, the BRK or the BRK1, the BRK1 offering a slightly, greater angle. We find that this is a little bit necessary because the sheath is not steerable, and therefore you want to be able to ensure that you can reach the septum, especially in patients with larger atrium. So pre-shaping the dilator to take on that more exaggerated bend has been very useful. And then when you introduce that through the sheath, rarely do you also have to add some curvature to the sheath, but normally the dilator will hold that exaggerated curvature all through the transseptal puncture process. Well, I definitely think that larger bore sheets are a little bit different than the smaller sheets. We had had an extensive experience using this system when we were doing cryoballoon procedures, and that was already a larger bore sheet. So this is only minimally larger. I think like anything else, the biggest a safeguard that needs to be done is good sheath management to make sure that no air is trapped in the system. So of course, we've all gotten used to aspirating and flushing appropriately to minimize any air entry through the sheath. And as long as you take that caveat, the rest of the procedure should be relatively straightforward. Well, again, I think that anytime you have these simplified transseptal procedures and you're using a fluoroscopy to cross the septum, you save time simply because you eliminate the exchanges. So, if you are coming down and you miss the sweet spot, it's very easy to just wire back up and retry again. And none of that is going to take a lot of time. It's not going to require removal of equipment from the body and then reintroduction of the process, and all of those steps that are now all incorporated into one inevitably leads to less fluoroscopy time because the procedure is not requiring us to do all of these other individual components that were previously necessary. In general, I think we all want to eliminate any catheter exchanges for a variety of reasons. First, of course, it saves time. Every one of those exchanges takes time. Second is there are occasions where you cross into the left atrium, and in the process of exchanging from one sheet to another, you can lose transseptal access. And that's obviously very frustrating and very time consuming, and certainly not what we want with our patients. But lastly, and most importantly, that every time you do an exchange, I think it introduces the possibility of introducing air into the left atrium. And we know air embolism is a major issue with procedures, especially as we transition to larger bore catheters. And so if you can eliminate all of those things with this simplified system, save time, reduce the likelihood of inadvertent loss of left atrial access, and minimize the likelihood of air embolism, I think that's a real win-win for everyone involved.